Daniel, you're on mute.
So welcome to everybody. I was on mute, so I repeat. You are many I have expected this keynote from Pascal Koppen. So China, the first AI superpower. So it's a pleasure to welcome you, Pascal. You are an expert in all things innovation and day after tomorrow in China, rooted in your deep understanding of the country as a sinologist. You are an entrepreneur at heart with more than 20-year experience in China and Silicon Valley. Pascal, you have employed, partner, and competed with hundreds of Chinese innovators. You are armed with a degree in business engineering from Solvay Business School, and you started your career with Alcatel in Shanghai. And after an intense period in Silicon Valley at Wind River System and Polycore Software, you returned to China and later founded Let's Safe to build the first offline digital community platform from premium brands. Currently, Pascal, you are an international keynote speaker and partner at Nextwork and author of the book China's New Normal, which offers sensational insights into business and technology in China and their potential to the rest of the world. So, Pascal, thank you for being there. The floor is yours.
Hello, just a second. I'm trying to get rid of my my screen because I don't think you can see me, right?
Yeah.
No, okay. There's something strange happening right now. So you see me very dark. I'm going to switch to another camera, if that's okay.
Yes.
This is should not happen. Okay. Okay. So for some reason, my camera is not working. So should I start like this, or should I?
Do you have slides or?
Yeah, I've had slides.
Okay.
I really apologize, but my camera suddenly went completely wrong.
Yeah. Okay. There is light in your room.
Okay, let me just start the presentation and then I'll try and fix it afterwards, if that's okay for all of you.
Yes.
Okay. So this is clear now? Okay.
We can see the slide.
Okay, good. So I'll start, and I apologize for my screen. Something is going on with my camera, but I don't have the time to fix it. So you'll see me in dark for the rest of the time. And this has nothing to do with the dark China. This has everything to do with my camera. So I'm going to talk about China, the first AI superpower. And in order to understand how China is becoming, and I believe will become very soon, the first AI superpower, I think it's very good to go back in time. And so I would like to take you all along to 30 years ago. This was me. I was young and naive, and I was traveling through the country for 2 months. I took every train possible that you can imagine. This was a wonderful experience, and this was the moment that I truly, truly fell in love with this country. I fell in love with China, but more so with the people. I fell in love with the Chinese because of their energy and their passion, their determination, their resilience, and their hard work. But most important, and that's what I want to talk about today, is their dreams and their hopes for a better future. Now, if we go back to 1990, 30 years ago, when I was in China the first time, what we saw is that there were still 754 million people living below the extreme poverty line. China was extreme poor just 30 years ago. And I took a lot of pictures back then, and as you can see, China was very poor. But in 30 years' time, China completely took out all the poverty out of the country. And so today, in 2021, it actually stands at 0. And that is really what we should realize. This happened in just 30 years' time. Now, all of these people, they went to the factories to work 24/7 to provide the goods and the products that we love so much in the West. But also for them, their lives improved a lot. And we sometimes forget that as well. Now, they went to the cities like Shenzhen or cities like Shanghai. 40 years ago, Shenzhen was 30,000 people. Today, it is about 20 million. Look at Shanghai, it doubled in population. These cities today look completely different. Some of the most beautiful skylines in the East. And whenever I take people to those cities, to Shanghai or Shenzhen, and I show them this, and I say, this has been built in 30 years' time, the answer is always, this is a miracle. But for me, this is not the real miracle of China. The real miracle of China only started like 7, 8 years ago, the moment Chinese started changing their mindset. And this went from the visible to the invisible world. This was all about software, about solutions, about services, things like IoT, 5G, blockchain, AI, all these things that you cannot touch, but which are touching Chinese lives much more than these buildings have ever done for them. And that is the miracle of China. Now, it really started only in 2008. That is the moment where 3G licenses of telecommunication were made available in China for the very first time. It meant that every Chinese who could afford buying a smartphone was buying a smartphone. And so in 10 years' time, by 2018, 98% of the Chinese internet users were actually going on the internet with a mobile phone. China became a mobile-only, mobile-first country. And they were seriously addicted to their phone. They were glued to their phone, but the main reason was that actually every application that was built over the past 10 years has always been built standard mobile first, very different from in the West. And so they got really glued to that screen. Now, as you can see, sometimes a Chinese falls into a fountain, but China would not be China if they wouldn't be able to solve these problems. So China's building the digital path towards the future. And from now on, we can realize, or we can accept that if we look at China's past, we can start understanding our future. And this is for digital, but it's also about artificial intelligence. And we'll talk a little bit about AI's past in China. But besides the digital and AI and all this innovation, what's really impressive to see is the middle class that has grown over the past 10 years. Today, we're talking about more than 200 million families. That is more than 400 to 500 million people, 500 million people that belong to the middle class in China, that has the same quality of life as the middle class of someone in Belgium. This little video was taken just one day after the lockdowns in Shanghai. That's 12 months ago. And what you see is that people are not lining up at Primark or Action stores. They're lining up at Gucci, Chanel, Cartier, L'Oreal, all these luxury brands. There's so much money in China. And this creates a market-driven economy today. But to me, 2015 is the most symbolic year for China. 5 years ago, now 6 years ago, is actually the year that Xi Jinping said to everyone in China that by 2030, that's in 10 years from now, China will become the leader in global innovation. And when Chinese say they want to be the leader, usually they don't want to come second place. But these words, this ambition that he expressed 5 years ago, really created the tensions between America and China. It started with a technology war, Huawei, ZTE, and later it was WeChat and TikTok and lots of Chinese companies that cannot get access to US technology or the US market. After a couple of years, it became about trade. And then the last 3 years, it's all been about the trade war, which is still not resolved after 3 years. And then, of course, 2020 was all about coronavirus. But the relationship between China and the US in 2020 has never been as bad as over the past 50 years. Some people even talk about a geopolitical Cold War that is happening right now, where the coronavirus has been used last year as the weapon of preference on both sides. So everybody looking at this and reading this in the media could conclude that China is in the biggest crisis they've ever had to experience. But it would be wrong to think that China has not had other crises. They know very much what crises are about. Think about pollution, about energy need. Think about urbanizations with cities of 30, 25 million people. Security risk that comes with it, but also an overpopulation of 1.4 billion people, of which 250 million are 60 years or older. an older generation now. Medical challenges and food quality, things we all know from the coronavirus pandemic now, and then new problems like mobility, education, unemployment, things like real estate bubble, the debt of China. I mean, China has so many problems. And each of these problems, all of them separately, each of them is actually a problem at a scale of 100 to 1,000 times bigger than what we face in Belgium. And that means that Chinese and the Chinese government and everybody understands they cannot solve this with people anymore. They need technology, more than enough people. And that's why 5 years ago, the focus was really on disruptive technology to take this leap into the future and not do a transformation. And central to it all is artificial intelligence, because they want to make society smarter. And they have a lot of smart people, but that won't help anymore. They need technology to augment those people. Now, just 8 years ago, 2012, if you read articles about China, you saw many, many media talking about that it would take at least 20 years for China to become innovative, and probably 30 to 40 years before they could catch up to the West. We were very sure it wouldn't happen very quickly. And then just this year or last year, you saw completely different messages from the exact same authors. And this is about now a technology supremacy race between the US and China, specifically when it's about AI. So what did we not see happen in 2012? How could we not have foreseen that this was happening? Because there were so many signs. Go back 5 years ago, 2016, the 2 sessions in March, it was really talking about China that would promote the integration of the internet, big data, and AI into the real economy. And that's what it's all about. All these technologies, it's all about integrating in the real economy. It's not about building cool stuff like in Silicon Valley very often. But when Chinese say they want to promote something, we often read, yeah, they will start doing it. But what it actually means is that they want to just go very, very fast and change society. Now, 5 years later at the 2 sessions, which was just last week, they were now talking about nurturing the digital industries with AI and blockchain, cloud, and 5G. And when Chinese talk about nurture, actually they want to lead. And that is the word we should remember. And so these signs are very, very clear, but we don't read them correctly. Now, even if we go just 3 years back, 2017, that is the moment where China started this next generation AI plan with a couple of months later, a real action plan on how to build on 3 years' time, so by today, to build really a leading AI country. And if you look at all the other countries, we were way behind China. So how come we didn't see these signs? Now, when we talk about China, we talk about AI, we often have this vision or this idea about this dystopian society, this control state, this police state. It's all top down decide, this one party, communist party that is basically controlling a population of 1.4 billion people. And although there is some truth to it, reality is Chinese feel that very different, because what Chinese see is how AI is being used to change society. One of the things that is not often talked about is that besides these legislators, there's also every year at the 2 sessions, which was last week, the CPPCC, which is the Chinese People's Politics Consultative Conference, where there's a lot of experts, just like AI for Belgium. They invite a lot of experts to give their opinion, their suggestion, their advice, and challenge the government on how to improve and go to the next level and go to the future. There's open forum with journalists and people are asking questions, and there's a lot of debate to form these regulations and laws for the future. Companies like Tencent, Baidu, Xiaomi, and Lenovo are sending their founders to express what they want. And some of the things I wrote down here, this is about just last week, they talked about integration of IoT with AI. They talked about more emphasis on basic research for AI and other technologies, strengthening the key innovation hubs in China, but very interesting. They really want to strengthen the role of ethics. Imagine China caring about ethics and morals. Yes, this is happening. And it's the industry that wants it. They want more standardized approaches for AI, and they want more safety and cybersecurity for AI. And this is just a short list. I always have experienced China bottom up, but everything we read in the media is always top down. And I think to understand what China's doing in AI, we need to start looking at the bottom up. And the good place to start is the startups and the funded AI companies in China. So going back 3 years, what we see is that US and China had a lot of AI funded companies. But if you separate them out, what you see is that that US in blue is really focused on these disruptive technologies, these moonshot innovations. It's about NLP, natural language processing. It's about machine learning. It's about technology platforms, things that will really change society. It's about military and drones. It's about computer chips. It's taking these leaps into the future. While China is much more focused, or was 3 years ago and still today, on using AI applications or technologies that can be made money immediately. Think about computer vision or image recognition and pattern recognition, things like intelligent robots, self-driving cars, speech recognition. And they made so much money over the past 3 years that now they have the money to do the research. And the result is that it created some companies that we didn't know about existed 3 years ago. Companies like TikTok, owned by ByteDance. Everybody knows what TikTok is today, but 5 years ago, nobody had any clue. But this is one of the biggest AI companies globally in social media, if not the biggest when it comes to AI. Fintech and financial, the biggest fintech in the world, mainly using artificial intelligence to make everything possible. And then there's a company like Didi, the Uber of China, which in my view has become the most experienced company globally when it comes to mobility. And so if we want to understand mobility problems in the future, a good place to start is to look at Didi, because they have 70 terabytes of data every day that they can use of their 500 million users that they have globally, not just in China. They're in more than 12 countries around the globe, including Japan, Australia, and Mexico. And then a company we've never heard about probably is Pinduoduo. But this is a company that in 3 years, everybody will talk about because they are disrupting agriculture. And all of these companies are global. They're the number one in the world. And basically, they've used AI to reach that goal. Now, I want to say something about using AI during the corona pandemic, because I believe that having artificial intelligence already implemented in society in China has really helped to deal with the outbreaks. AI was used in China at the very beginning a year ago to find the gene, to do gene detection, but also for the vaccine, which is a very different story, but they're using AI. Every hospital, AAA hospital in China, is using AI to help diagnose the virus at this stage. But it was used primarily for lung cancer, which was a big problem in China before the pandemic, and every hospital had it available. So these AI diagnosis systems are ready and was already ready before 2020. Tracking and forecasting outbreaks happening very often and on a massive scale, the use of AI to make sure that people complied with the regulation and the measures like face recognition, heat detection, drones, and lots of things that were using artificial intelligence. The biggest company in China using AI is actually a delivery company. They have the most advanced AI dispatching system in the world, which is called Meituan, is this company. And this has helped the Chinese to get their groceries at home so they didn't have to go out to do the shopping like we often had to do in Belgium. In places like Wuhan, robots and self-driving cars were used to go into the compounds or into the hospitals. Then on healthcare, even in 2019, there were 500 million Chinese using the application that is called Good Doctor, which is an AI-based diagnosis and communication tool or telemedicine tool for all the Chinese that want to know something about their health. And so this was used already on a large scale. So implementing it then later, when it all happened, the pandemic came out, was very, very easy. Then, of course, there's AI for education and for work. When it comes to work, I do believe the US is still ahead of China for AI applications. But let's not forget that the founder of Zoom is a Chinese and came up with the idea in China. And then when we look at EdTech, education technology, there's hundreds of millions of students that were using the EdTech during the pandemic and during the lockdowns, and they didn't experience the problems that we had with Smart School. Now, the book that you should really read if you're interested in understanding everything about China and AI and the superpowers is a book from Kai-Fu Lee, the former CEO of Google in China. And he really talks about these two powers, China and Silicon Valley. Very interesting book. But the most interesting part of it is that he doesn't talk about Europe. And so the fact that he leaves this open, or actually it's a void, is very telling about what his opinion is about Europe and AI. And I want to change that by showing what's happening in China. Now, I'm leaning much more to another CEO of Google who's in the US, or former CEO, called Eric Schmidt. And he's now the chairman of the US National Security Commission on AI. And he's saying very, very clearly that China's plans, resources, and progress should be a concern for all Americans. So we should be taking China very, very seriously and look at it with a lot of attention, because their ambitions to surpass the US as the world leader in AI this decade is almost a certainty. That's why I call this presentation the first AI superpower. Now, I believe China in the next decade is going to lead in terms of becoming the AI superpower. And I think it's because of 4 reasons: data, adoption, the infrastructure, and talent. And I'm going to talk about all 4 of them. First one, data. We know China has a lot of data, but this little girl, 5, 6 years old, is buying some candy in a shop with her smartwatch as if this is the most normal thing in life. She's probably never used real money, and I don't think she ever will. In 2019, already 81% of the Chinese with a smartphone were using mobile payment every single day. Cities like Shanghai, where I lived for 20 years, are completely cashless cities right now. And this is a city twice the size of Belgium. And so they're leading ahead of the US, really years ahead. Now, the biggest difference, in my view, is not just the mobile payment, but it's the super applications of China. And specifically, when you look at Tencent and WeChat, there's no comparison. But China has about a dozen of these super applications. And they have all the applications you could imagine, and every application you have on your phone is actually embedded in that one application, plus millions of mini apps of brands that just want to have kind of a mini website on the WeChat application. But it's not the amount of apps that's important. It's the fact that they all work in one ecosystem. What that means is that you can combine social with commerce and start doing social commerce. You can combine healthcare with finance, or insurance with travel. You can combine all these things and never have to leave the ecosystem. And so the advantage of China is that they don't only have a lot of data, but they have a lot of contextual data. So it's not broad only, it's also very deep, the data they have, and they know a lot about users. And if you look at Alibaba, a company that's now about 20 years old, you see how many products they're all built in the past 20 years. And then you compare that with the companies in the West that built these products. And what you see is that all these companies are all separate entities in one industry and are competing sometimes with each other and definitely not sharing data with each other. In China, just one company like Alibaba has access to data over all these similar products, and that helps them to track the user journey. Now, I want to talk a little bit about user adoption, because I think that has created the reason why there's so much data that China can use. Definitely in e-commerce, if you look there, China is already the #1 country in the world. In 2019, China had 40% of the global e-commerce happening in that one country. 1 out of 2 people buying online is a Chinese, very clear. And this has everything to do with the easiness of adoptivity that Chinese have. If you talk about a more controversial topic like face recognition, then you see, for example, these girls at going to school, they have to scan their face in order to get into school at the entrance of the school. And this is every single day. And you could ask the question, why do you need these children to scan their face to get into school? This is madness. This is stupid. But reality is that today there's still thousands of children that get abducted at school. This is a huge problem, and parents are really scared about this fact. And so this face recognition is really to make sure that children are in school, and when they leave, it is known. Now, if you go inside schools in Shanghai, Beijing, Shenzhen, or Guangzhou, all these big cities, what you see is that more and more you can scan your face in order to get lunch. So as a student, if you didn't bring your face today, sorry, no lunch today. So in China, as you know, you can easily lose your face. So always bring your face to school is the story. But this talks about convenience. And if you go into more public areas, think about an airport, a train station, think about places like a subway station, then you always see these police robots. And these robots have cameras everywhere. There's face recognition embedded and object detection and all these things using artificial intelligence. And it is part of the story that they want to control big crowds. But go into a train station in China and there's not 100 people, there's 10,000 people. That is the problem. Now go into a public area like a hospital, or you go into a bank, what you see is that now you have these humanoid robots with a camera inside and face recognition. They can recognize you and provide you butler service. I've seen people of 70, 80 years old talking to one of these robots, trying to open a bank account. It's hilarious, but the alternative is to wait 2 or 3 hours before a person can serve you. That's because of the number of people in China. Go outside of the bank, there's an ATM, you want to get money out of the ATM, you smile and the money's flowing out. Life can be easy at times. And this has everything to do with convenience. And if you go to any convenience store in Shanghai, Beijing, the big cities, you can already pay with Alipay, which is a face payment system from Alibaba or Ant Financial. Go into a market, go into a restaurant, a vending machine, you can simply pay with scanning your face. Despite the fact that mobile payment is really light years ahead of the West, actually face payment is the new normal, and that will be the leading part of China. Now talking about one of my favorite topics, which is infrastructure, because I believe that is where China is making the biggest difference. There's a Chinese saying going, Yao Xiang Fu Xian Xiu Lu. And what that means, it's 100 years old, this saying, hundreds of years. And actually it means if you want to become rich and wealthy, let's first build a road or repair your road. And so Chinese have been building digital roads for the past many, many years. Just last year, China committed to invest 1.4 trillion US dollars into the digital transformation of China. This is huge. A lot of it will go into artificial intelligence. The past years, we've seen what happened to 5G, so you can imagine what will happen to AI as well. 5G today, in March 2021, that means in China that 300 cities have coverage of 5G already. And there's 200 million 5G smartphones that were sold over the past 18 months or 12 months. And all of these smartphones, that's 85% of the global sale of 5G smartphones. There's 1 million base stations being put into China. US has about 50,000 to give an example. And so that is really where it all happened. And it's all happened in just 1 to 2 years' time. It means that China has become the most connected place on the planet in just 2 years' time. Now, a lot of that is about creation of applications. And so I've seen in 2018, in 2019, every company starting to build 5G plus AI plus IoT applications. Unmanned vehicles is a very good example. You see them everywhere in compounds, and even you can get robo-taxis in Shanghai and Shenzhen in certain districts. Also everywhere in schools, you see them running or driving around without a driver. Things like telemedicine is happening very, very often today, but this was already before 2020. Remote surgery, the very first 5G-enabled remote surgery happened a year ago. And now it's becoming common practice in many of the hospitals in China. It's using artificial intelligence and 5G. Remote mining, the biggest company behind that transformation is Huawei. We don't always think about it, but they care about the safety, it seems. Now, this will become a big industry because it's very dangerous to do mining anywhere in the world. But what really interests me is this topic about environment. And just in September last year, Xi Jinping, the President of the People's Republic of China, said very clearly at the General Assembly of the United Nations that by 2060, that's in 40 years from now, China will become carbon neutral. And I believe they will reach that goal and probably be ahead of the deadline. Now, the reason I believe that is if you just look at the past 2 years, they've been doing magnificent things when it comes to the environment, again, using artificial intelligence. Smart garbage collection system in many cities in China today. I'm from Ghent in Belgium. We don't have a system like that. This system really will separate you by object detection, but also has face recognition to make sure if you did it wrong that you get fined. I took this picture myself. This is from State Grid in Beijing, the biggest energy company in the world. And they control or check 1 million electrical vehicle charging stations from one central point. It's all enabled and augmented with artificial intelligence. And they know exactly what's happening throughout the country, also to distribute the energy in the right way. Then there's the city brains, one of my favorite topics, because this is really where cities have become smart cities. And a city like Hangzhou, which is the base of Alibaba, you can already see that they're using artificial intelligence to really control all the traffic lights and to make sure that there's actually not so many traffic jams. So our Prime Minister, Alexander De Croo, would probably have been on time at this keynote this morning if there would have been a system in Brussels like there is in Hangzhou. Now, they're also building new cities, and that's one of the cool things. Tencent is one of them. There's another one called Xiong'an, close to Beijing, but they're building many new cities from scratch. Tencent is building a net city the size of Manhattan, and this is really a model for post-corona China to show how humans and nature can live together. And all of these cities will have only self-driving cars, will be fully embedded with IoT, 5G, and of course made smart with artificial intelligence. And the reason they do this is because there's still hundreds of millions of Chinese that will go to the cities in the future. And so they're better start from scratch to see how the future should look like. Now, one of the topics that people often challenge us with, challenge Chinese or challenge me or anyone who talks about China being innovative, it's about semiconductors. And you often hear that China wants to catch up with the US, but they're still lagging behind. It won't be easy. It will take a lot of time. And I believe that we're looking at this completely the wrong way. For me, China's evolution in semiconductor came a lot later than the rest of the world. But to me, if you see what they've done in the past years, they're already at the base camp at 6,800 meters high, and they just need to do that last stretch to catch the top of the Everest. But that is the most difficult part. And lots of companies will die in that way, that last part towards that. And these are the companies and the examples we will see in the media, but there's also going to be a lot of companies that will succeed. Because from now on, it's not so much government driven, it's market driven. What we've seen as news articles just the last weeks, and this is all from the 1st of January, is that Tencent will start building and investing their AI chips. Baidu is doing the same thing. ByteDance from TikTok is doing the same thing. Alibaba's been doing it for 2 years. Huawei's been doing it for multiple years. Every tech company, every big tech is now investing in AI silicon and AI chips. And that is really market driven. And that is what will change China and make China succeed in becoming a chip manufacturer. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is about talent, because often people say, yeah, but the real talent, the real researchers, the innovators are still in the US or in Europe. And I would challenge that also. But where do you find good talent in China? That's really the question, what it's all about. One place to look at is, for example, at a job fair in Shanghai. I was there once. I can tell you, don't ever go to a job fair in Shanghai. It's complete madness. But I thought at that point it would be interesting to distribute flyers, but I was out the door after 2 minutes. But every year, China has 8 million people that graduate from university. 8 million people. It's almost the population of Belgium. And out of these 8 million people, almost 5 million people, 4.666 million to be exact, are graduating with an engineering degree, a science, technology, engineering, or math degree. They're all engineers. 1 out of 3 in the world are Chinese. And then there's India. And if you take the other Asian countries, it's more than 2/3, almost 3/4 of the world is coming from Asia. So when people challenge me and say, can China really become the leader in innovation, the leader in AI? I say, of course they can. In quantity, there's always quality. There's smart people everywhere in the world. It's just China has many more smart people than we have. It's just a numbers game. There's nothing else to it. But what's interesting is even if you look at the smart people in the US, specifically in the area of AI, half of them seem to be Chinese, according to the head of AI research from E2, one of the biggest face recognition companies in China. So that is quite remarkable. And what if they all go back to China? Then that might be an issue. Now, the reason I believe that talent is really the driver of innovation in China and the driver of AI is because AI specialists in China are paid twice as much as an IT specialist. And pragmatic as Chinese are, it's a very simple calculation. Everybody wants to become an AI specialist because you earn twice the salary. And so this really drives these young people, this young talent to become the leader of tomorrow. Now, they're also filing a lot of patents these days. They're also doing a lot of publications, and they're about the same level as the US. And some could say, yeah, the US is leading or China is leading, but it's very clear that those two countries are the superpowers when it comes to that. Now, not all of these patents are actually getting approved and getting used. There's a lot of people that are still using it just to get their PhD or to be in one of those labs to show to their teacher or to anybody else that they're smart. But let's not forget, this is only 3-4 years, and this will take time. And give it another 3-4 years, and we'll see a lot of this actually coming from China. Now, to me, the real disruption is happening bottom up. And this is from the entrepreneurs, the people, the millions of entrepreneurs in China that want to become the next Jack Ma. They aspire to become the next Alibaba. And they see AI as the way to make that happen. And that is something to think about. They see AI not just as a tool, but as an enabler for their own career, their own future. And all of these entrepreneurs, they're all looking at the same markets. They're all focusing on what we call red oceans. Red oceans is typically markets with a lot of customers, a lot of opportunity, a lot of money, but it's also a market with a lot of challenges and a lot of competitors. And so Chinese have learned to become agile by DNA because everybody's fighting in the same red ocean. That's why I call it a bloody ocean, because it's a bloody gladiator fight to the death to actually survive in this red ocean. But to do that, you need to be fast. And I believe you can never be faster than Chinese. You can be better than Chinese in many aspects, innovation and research and basically marketing, in branding and project management and management in general, lots of things, but never ever in speed. Specifically when there's a lot of hurdles, and in China there are, then they're always faster than us. And that is my personal experience. Now, Klaus Schwab, the founder of the World Economic Forum, said a couple of years ago that in the future, in this new world, and we could call this the new normal or the post-pandemic world, it's not the big fishes that will eat the small fishes, it's the fast fishes that will eat the slow fishes. And Chinese are extremely fast. But more important than being fast is that they work in these ecosystems together, like Alibaba, Tencent, and ByteDance, and all of these ecosystems to actually eat these big fishes that could be the Western companies of today. Now, to conclude, I believe China has more data, they have probably a lot more, and they have better infrastructure, they have a lot better user adoption, and this all helps basically to feed these AI algorithms and become a superpower in AI. But the real reason, in my view, why I believe China will become the first AI superpower is simply because they focus on education. And out of the 19 biggest unicorns in the world in technology, 9 of them are Chinese. And all of them are heavily embedded with artificial intelligence, even using virtual teachers, virtual students, whatever you can do to score exams, whatever you can think of AI, it's all been embedded. And students are using it in their programs already. Basically, Chinese students, Chinese kids are falling in love with tools, with products that are embedded with AI, but they're also learning about AI and they really want to become the next AI specialist. And today there's already almost 500 million Chinese students taking these online educational or training platforms every single day. And that is the reason why I believe China will become the first AI superpower within this decade. And with that, I think I will conclude my presentation. Stopping the sharing.
Thank you so much, Pascal.
I'm going to take my camera out, maybe this. Okay.
So I will look at the chat and see if there are some questions. There are many. So a first question, do you think that GDPR or other privacy legislation in Europe limits the development in important areas like, for example, face recognition? And how does China deals with this legal-wise?
Yeah, it's a very interesting approach or topic, because I want to thank for this question, because I do believe that we have a wrong perception on how China deals with privacy. Actually, China cares much more about privacy than we see it and we hear about it. There's a cybersecurity law and a data privacy law in China that came about 2 years ago. That was kind of like a formulation. Right now, it's a real law. And since the January 1st of this year, 2021, if you do data breaches or you actually don't protect the data or you collect it in the wrong way, you will be fined. And this is very, very serious. And I can guarantee you that most of the tech companies in China are way more scared than the technology companies in Europe, because you don't want to get the government to say that you have done something wrong in China. So I think there's the tech companies are getting more serious about it, but also the consumers are getting much more concerned about what China and the government could do with the AI. And when you look at the health QR codes that was used everywhere, there was a lot of discussion on social media, on Weibo, which is a Twitter of China, to explain like, yeah, I mean, can we trust this? And so all these debates that we're having in Europe is happening in China too. The only difference is that they first innovate and then they regulate. We regulate first and then we innovate. And there's a few years gap between those two.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if that gives you an answer.
Do you think we can catch up with
China?
Europe? Yeah.
Well, I think in general, it depends how we look at artificial intelligence. If we look at it from the data perspective and internet perspective, I don't think Europe will have an easy time to catch up either to the US or to China. There's just too much data there. And so we need more data, but it takes time to get it. And Europe is very fragmented in itself. I know we're trying to do a lot of things, but I think that's going to be tough. So I do believe in some way, working with the US, working with China, we could use some of their results in order to actually keep up or catch up, I could say. Just like they copied us, maybe now it's our time to copy them. But at the same time, I do believe that we have also our benefits, our advantages in Europe, which is really about, we have great researchers, great institutions, and Chinese need these. And I do believe that we can use this as a bargaining chip to get access to what they have, not just the market, but also their solutions, and then try to together to do something. So I think Europe is not, I would say, dead yet when it comes to AI. Otherwise, I wouldn't be on this panel of experts. I do believe that we need to get our act together, and looking at China is a good way to be confronted with what's happening and how fast it's happening. But no, I think specifically if we focus on research, we focus on the hard part of AI, Chinese will love us, and I think we can stay ahead.
Thank you, Pascal.
Pleasure.
I have another question that is related to the first I asked you. It's from Koen van Vrankart. Do you believe that the Chinese competitive edge is in part due to the unfettered attitude towards human rights, including privacy and freedom of speech? If yes, how can we catch up?
It's a very loaded question, and I do believe that human rights should be top of the agenda for anyone in Europe when we think about China and deal with China, and China understands that this is a big concern that we have. But if you look at how AI is being used in society, then I can't put a number on it, but my experience personally is that 90 to 95% of the applications has nothing to do with human rights, has more to do with actually giving more convenience to consumers, to citizens. And it's not different from Amazon or Google or any other company in the world that is using AI. And ours also, I mean, when we talk about Google, we're not talking about human rights in the same way. So I don't think this fact enables China to actually go faster. I do, however, think, and that I think is relevant, is that everything that happens specifically in the northwest area of Xinjiang is becoming an AI laboratory, which we should look at very, very carefully and cautiously. And so they might figure out how to do things that we cannot do, but this is more government driven than it is market driven. And in my experience, most of the change in China is still market driven. It's not government driven, but it really helps as an entrepreneur when the government throws money at you.
Yeah, it's not a real question. Maybe you can comment on it. David attended the debate we had yesterday night around AI and education with the Minister of Higher Education of Wallonia. And during the debate, it has been stated that to adapt the plan on the secondary school program in Fédération Wallonie-Bruxelles, and for the rollout, we need at least to wait until 2030 to put in place, for example, new classes around programming and artificial intelligence in high secondary school, for example.
Yep.
primary and secondary school.
Yeah, 2030. That's like in Chinese terms, that's like a century. So I think that will become an issue. I do believe the reason that China is going so fast in integrating AI into schools and into education is not pure because of the education system itself, but it's more because the families, most of the parents want their children to learn English. And this drives them to use technology. They want them to learn new skills. And so I think maybe the better approach in Belgium, but of course I'm not a politician and I don't create laws, but the better approach could be indeed to get more awareness of the parents of the benefit of learning this even out of school and not per se in school. And then what happens in China is that because of all of these parents, they see this opportunity, then the school adapting to the reality. And so it's the other way around that we often see it. But 2030, in my view, indeed is way too far. But it's,
sure.
In China, a year is 5 years here sometimes.
It's a huge challenge. Huh? It's a huge challenge, and we must find solution and solution, a fast solution. It seems the adoption of AI tech is largely driven by convenience. In the West, privacy guarantees are at least equally important. How would you explain the difference in trust in big tech companies? It's from Bob van Dijk.
Yeah, so trust is a very, I mean, I think one of the most challenging but also interesting topics when it comes to China, because interesting enough, we don't trust China very often. I mean, and it really went down last year with the coronavirus or China virus, like Trump calls it. But the reality is that if you look within China, the Chinese trust their system and even their government, which is kind of like the father of the system, and Xi Jinping embodies that. They trust it quite high. And the reason is mainly because so far it only improved their life. So yes, it has to do with convenience, but convenience is not just about having nice gadgets and lots of leisure opportunities. It's also about having things, being able to do things in life, which really makes your life richer. And so this is where the tech companies have been focused on, is to make life convenient, not just from a practical point of view, but also an emotional point of view. And the thing about Chinese big tech, which is very different from a Google and Amazon or Facebook, is that the Chinese big tech are very responsible and very careful about what they do, because they're getting watched by the government. And so the citizens, the consumers, have trust in the government being able to actually fine or penalize these big tech when a problem arises. While in the US, if you look at Mark Zuckerberg, he goes and explains it to the senators, which basically don't understand a word of what he's saying. And then afterwards, he just continues his job as if nothing ever happened. That wouldn't happen in China. And so amazingly enough, the trust that Chinese consumers and citizens have in the system actually enables them to have more trust in these tech companies. And with us, it's a little bit the other way around.
Thank you. Okay, a short question, but interesting. Is there a Chinese DARPA?
DARPA defense. Yep. So
you know, there is some challenges from the DARPA, and that is also something within JEDI initiative in Europe we want to maybe set up. So the idea that we launch challenges and that there is a competition in order to solve this challenge. Is there that kind of mechanism?
Well, I'm not an expert in the military, but I do know that China, when it comes to military institutes, has a lot of them. The Chinese Academy of Science and Technology, CASC for aerospace. I mean, there's a lot of these institutions which form some kind of a real advanced mechanism to actually protect themselves, protect the country. And I do believe that a lot of technology is being developed there. But I think the mistake that we often make is look at the military as being the scary part of China. I think right now the market is driving AI adoption much faster than the military adoption is. And so the military is maybe taking their ideas from the market these days. I think AI is a special beast in itself. And I do believe that data is more into society. But yes, indeed, things like drones, face recognition, I mean, missiles that are guided, all these things are things we should be worried about. And China has their own institutions to do exactly the same as the US or Europe has. I think China wants to work together and collaborate there, but there is so much tension happening in the world on geopolitical side these days that collaboration is becoming more and more difficult. And so it's becoming a black box on every side of the ocean. And so that's a little bit scary. But I do believe that the military budget in China, just to give to finish that, is about 1/3 of that of America. So it's still a long way to go. Of course, it's much bigger than Germany or any other country in Europe. But it's also growing every year with about 5%. But if you look at 10, 15 years ago, percentage-wise compared to GDP, they were investing much more in military than they are now. So although the number is bigger, percentage-wise, it's actually smaller. So we have to be careful saying that China is putting everything on military. I think it's not always the case.
Okay. What about open source software?
Yeah, I mean, AI and open AI and basically China is the country of open source. Why? Well, they copied everything.
Yeah.
So once you copy everything, you start sharing everything. And once you start sharing everything, by definition, it becomes open source, whether it was or not originally. It has become open source. So China has a very strong society that believes in open source because a creation is much more linked to a result than linked to the ego of the creator in China. And sharing with friends and sharing with people within the ecosystem actually helps you to build a bigger ecosystem. And so open source, you see it everywhere. So Alibaba, Tencent, Huawei, they're all doing open AI, open data, open hardware. Anything you can imagine is open in China. So yes, this is a big, even chip development will be open as well.
So you mean there are many contributors to the open source community?
Yes. Yes, of course.
Let's say scikit-learn, for example, on
GitHub, you can find a lot. So there's a lot of contribution in open source, but of course they started later than we have. So they first took what they could take and then built on that, because AI, most of the algorithms are actually open anyway. So yes, but they're contributing as well.
So there is a comment or question from Hans van Mingroot from IBM, if I remember well. Yes, what's happening with the Chinese culture or Confucianism holistic behavior? And was commenting on the last question. A difficult question. I think China wants to learn it all, wants to own it all, wants to manufacture it all. So what's happening with the Chinese culture?
Well, the problem with the Chinese culture, because I mean, I could talk an hour about this, but the problem is that Confucianism is one of the 4 things that is happening. There's Confucianism, which is very strong. It's actually very strong about values like trust and harmony and ethics. And so that's very Confucianist, but it's also about responsibility. And so you're kind of stuck in a certain environment. There's the legislation, so the rules. And that's also a culture where it's really about rules and regulation and the bureaucracy. And so when we think that Europe is very regulated, actually, this is part of Chinese culture itself, which is also 2,500 years old. Then there's the Taoist culture, where everything's possible and everything's good. And there you recognize the Chinese who wants to make money and will copy, and you'll see how it goes because he wants to improve his life and he doesn't care about tomorrow as long as he can get a better tomorrow. And so that is all embedded in one culture. And then you have the Western culture that has been incredibly influencing China in itself, capitalism, but also materialism. There's a lot of even democratic values. I mean, all of this is embedded in society. And so China doesn't have one culture. It has like 4 cultures. And so depending on who you talk to, what age he is, where he comes from, you can figure out, is he more Confucianist or more Taoist or more legalist, or is he more Western minded? Because maybe he studied in Harvard. And so it's very hard these days.
Okay, maybe last comment question before we end this fascinating session from Luc van Gaal. So you know Luc van Gaal is maybe or probably the best researcher in Belgium, and to Guy Leuven and ETH Zurich, and specialist in computer vision and autonomous vehicle application. So he says, okay, simply, China also is a meritocracy with lots of people wanting to work hard. No entitlement system that is creeping into Western societies. Are you severe like this, or?
Yeah, no. So severe meaning, do I agree?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. So no, I totally agree. I think the work ethic of Chinese is extreme, and so often we see these messages that Chinese have to work really hard because they are forced to work really hard. But most of the Chinese that I have met, and I've met a couple of thousands that I've talked to very often, they really want to do this because it improves their lives, and so their private and business is really coming together because they feel that they have to work hard to achieve that next goal. And the best way to understand how this works is try to launch a product in China, and you will know very quickly in a couple of months how hard it is to compete with Chinese. They're just very, very eager. And I think we've lost a little bit that edge in the West, and I do believe that's going to be a challenge. Because Chinese will really eat our lunch if we're not careful about stepping up in certain aspects. So I do believe this is one of the critical things. Now, this said, Chinese are also going one step higher now, meaning that they care more about their free time, and because they have more money, and so they care about things that we care about. So they're slowing down as well. But when you slow down a high-speed train, it's still very fast.
Pascal, thank you so much.
Yes, pleasure.
We have to go on the next session, and the session has been recorded, and so everyone can see it again if you do agree.
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Okay.
And if anybody has any questions for me, you can always reach out to me on LinkedIn or other social media.
Yeah. And Luc van Gaal with Frank Delart will do a keynote tomorrow at 5 p.m. also. So bye-bye, everybody, and see you in the next session.